Many of today's leading retired generals and admirals, many of the biggest voices you see on television nearly every day, are increasing their advocacy and stridency on suggesting that virtually every foreign policy issue we have today needs a military response. You're seeing it across the board here, and especially when we have this explosion in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. The problem is when all you are is a hammer, and that's the only tool in your kit bag, every problem seems like a nail. But when you have only a sledgehammer, then that's even worse because look, hammers, sledgehammers, all they do is destroy. You can't build anything with a hammer. That's all you can do is tear stuff apart. What we need is we need more statecraft. And that includes in that kit bag, you've got intelligence, wisdom, little humility, and yeah, a hammer. A hammer needs to be in that kit bag too. You can't have good diplomacy if you don't have military power to back it up. That's a common wisdom that everybody understands that truth. But if you only have a hammer in that kit bag, then all you're going to be doing is looking to go different places and threaten people. And let me tell you, folks, that doesn't work. Do we need any more proof than what we've seen over the last couple of decades, especially since 9/11, when that's nearly all we've led with? And how has that worked out for us? Has that made the world a safer place? Has that made America safer? No, it's had the opposite effect. We see our enemies increasing left and right across the board. Now, the problem with these admirals and generals that we have on television all the time is their answer to this is not let's have more wise policy. It's not let's take a look at what we've been doing and see what hasn't worked and maybe try something that's better. Instead, they want to double down on what they've been doing unsuccessfully for the last 20 something years now. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about here graphically so you see what I'm talking about. This is not just my opinion. This is pretty evident just at face value. First of all, we're going to take a look at something that was on TV just yesterday when we had retired Admiral John Kirby making a comment about some of the attacks that have been having on the United States by some of these Islamic groups, these radical groups in the Middle East against our troops in Iraq and Syria. He said this on Fox News.
What is President Biden waiting for? Is he waiting for Americans to be killed before he takes substantive action that will actually give Iran pause about telling its proxies to keep harassing us?
We're not waiting for anything, John. As you just saw over the weekend, we're certainly willing and able to take retaliatory strikes to protect our troops and our facilities, and we'll continue to do that. These groups and the IRGC, the Supreme Leader, they have a choice to make. We're not looking to escalate, but we absolutely have a viable mission in Iraq and Syria to go after ISIS, which is still a viable threat. And we got to make sure that we have the troops and the capabilities to do that, which means they need to know that we're going to do what we have to do to protect them. I would note that the flurry of attacks that occurred just in the wake of the strikes we took over the weekend were ineffective, no injuries, no significant damage, and most of them were intercepted and brought down before they even reached the actual facilities.
Okay, now as you know from watching Deep Dive here and so many times when I've been on Fox News and NBC and several other networks recently, I've been advocating that those troops in Iraq and in Syria be withdrawn because they're nothing but a point of strategic vulnerability. Now, let's take a look at that situation more carefully and what Kirby just said there, because he said something that's inaccurate and it's untrue. Now, I've advocated that we need to get the troops out because they don't do anything for the United States. Kirby said, no, actually they do. They still have a viable anti-ISIS mission. That is nonsense. Let's just take a look at the facts. So Obama, first of all, sent U.S. troops back into Iraq in 2014, in June 2014, when the Iraqi security forces collapsed in front of ISIS because they were so corrupt that they had not learned, how to even do their own job right. But Obama bailed them out. Now, I advocated at the time we didn't need to send any U.S. troops in there. That's an issue for the Iraqis to figure out. They've got it. It'll take them longer to do. It's more difficult for them. It's their country. They helped create the conditions that gave to the rise of ISIS. They need to fix it. They could have done it. They would have done it if they had been left to their own devices, because that's what countries do. But man, if you could call Uncle Sugar and have us come bail you out, then yeah, we're going to do that. So Obama did that. And so now we're helping the Iraqi security forces. Then when ISIS also spread into Syria, then now all of a sudden Obama thinks we need to help them too. So let's send in a bunch of American forces to help the Syrian Democratic forces in the middle of Syria. We're going to go help them also fight up in there. Again, that's not our fight. There's no risk to the United States that ISIS plays. They may want to attack the United States, but they don't have the capacity unless you put American troops on the ground in Syria or keep them in Iraq. Now then, they actually have access to us and they actually can attack us, but otherwise they wouldn't be able to. Now, we helped when President Trump came into office. He inherited this from Obama. Now, again, I suggested we should have withdrawn them, but he didn't. He said, no, we're going to go for the territorial defeat of ISIS. And so he pushed his troops both in Iraq and in Syria to do just that. And then by March of 2017, I believe it was, both those missions had been accomplished. ISIS had been driven out of Mosul. They had been driven out of their so-called capital in Raqqa in Syria. And that mission was finished. Then we should have withdrawn our troops, which Trump said he was going to do. He said he was going to withdraw our troops from Syria, especially 3 times. And 3 times he was resisted by what some like to call the deep state. It's the institution who loves to have troops everywhere. And we're like, no, we don't want to get rid of them. Let's protect the oil. That's, of another country without the permission of that country. So that's what allegedly we were going to do. But even so, at the end of his term, Trump said, hey, let's withdraw our troops. Didn't happen again. So now here comes President Biden, and he inherits what Trump had. And now he's got about 1,000 troops or so in Syria and 2,500 or so in Iraq. Now, they are not doing anything for the United States. This myth that we're doing a counter ISIS mission is nonsense. That's like trying to drain a swimming pool with an eyedropper in a heavy rain. Yeah, you can fill that eyedropper up every time you put it in the water. It's meaningless. To this day, the DNI of the United States says that there are somewhere around 16,000 members of ISIS in the 2 countries. Now, tell me what any rational person thinks that 1,000 troops in the country of Syria that are basically on a few pinpoint spots on the map, and 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq, which basically stay in the barracks. They don't even go out and do missions. What do you think that's going to do to 16,000 so-called ISIS fighters? And who even knows how many there really are? But they're not going to eradicate anything. And folks, I have firsthand knowledge about this. I served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, 4 total in my career. And I watched us at the height of the surge that we had in 2010, 2011, when we had 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops trying to eradicate the Taliban. That was the target at that time. And that was the same mentality that you keep hearing from all of these admirals and generals, many of the same ones, I'll point out, that you hear today, said, no, we need to hit them harder. We need to send more troops there. That's why Obama sent the surge in the first place, because he was told by the generals that that's what we needed to do to eradicate the Taliban and al-Qaeda by extension. Neither one of those things happened. Every time we sent more troops over, I watched it with my own eyes. Every time we sent more troops over there, the Taliban increased in power, didn't decrease in power. So finally, Obama just got tired of it, and he said, yeah, well, this isn't going to work, so let's go ahead and leave. And he drew us down to a small number. And of course, Trump just let it ride there. And you see, it never made any difference in the Taliban. It never made any difference in what they call ISIS-K in Afghanistan or in the remnants of al-Qaeda. It just had no impact on it, neither positive nor negative. It just caused us to lose troops, caused us to suffer casualties, and it caused us to spend a lot of money until Biden finally, and I gave him credit for this, and I still do to this day, withdrew from Afghanistan. So he finally recognized that's never going to work. Let's get out. Now, it's a separate issue. We can talk about how he got out. It was disastrous. It could have been done 100 times better. We'll leave that for another day. That can be discussed. But the fact that he did get out, it was the right answer to do. That's what we should do in Iraq and in Syria for the same reasons. But you have these generals saying, no. We got to do more. We need more. We got to keep those guys there. And if you think I'm making that part up, let's look at the next little clip we have here from Jack Kean.
The United States has lost its ability to deter its adversaries. Our adversaries for the last 2-3 years have gotten considerably more aggressive. We did not deter Putin in Ukraine. We have not deterred the Iranians from what they're attempting to do here in using their instrument, Hamas, to destroy as much of Israel as they can, weaken Israel politically, isolate them geopolitically, certainly, get worldwide condemnation against Israel, and try to force a collapse of the government.
So now I'm going to show you in a minute what he recommends that we do as a result of those things. But just like Kirby was wrong in his justification for why we need those troops there, Kean is wrong in what he's going to say is what we need to do in results of that, because he was also referring to the same issue of U.S. troops being attacked in Iraq and Syria. But his justification is way off the bar. He says we're not deterring anybody, so we got to get stronger. And his examples, we didn't deter Putin in Ukraine, and we didn't deter Hamas in Israel. Okay, again, let's just look at this from the surface and actually listen to what he said. Somehow he's suggesting that the United States needs to be not just a global cop, but the worldwide deterrent force for anyone everywhere. They don't need their own defense forces. They don't need to, any other country doesn't need to do the right things and take care of its own national security. No, we need to do it. So if anyone attacks anyone anywhere, it's our fault. We should have been stronger. We should have been ready to tell Vladimir Putin, we're going to go to war with you if you attack Ukraine. That would have been insane. Russia is a nuclear power. We're a nuclear power. We go to war with Russia, we're in a nuclear war, and millions of people, probably many of people watching this very show here, would end up being killed. Maybe I would be. I'm in Washington, D.C. We'd probably be one of the first targets. That's insane. Do you understand that? It is insane to suggest that we could have deterred Russia, and the only way you can deter by is having a legitimate threat to actually make good on your promise that you'll go to war. So we have to be ready to do that. That's nonsense. That wasn't our fight then. It's not our fight now. That's something between Russia and Ukraine, and if anything else in Europe, there are other countries that are in the region. But it's not America to deter Putin from doing anything. It was up to Ukraine to either have some kind of negotiated settlement to try to make it where they didn't need to be invaded or whatever. You can argue that wouldn't have happened. Maybe it wouldn't have. But we don't know that because it was never tried, because we, quote, had their back, and now they went to war and they're suffering because of that today. He also says that Hamas attack was because we're not deterring anyone. Again, putting ourselves in the position that we're supposed to stop everybody from doing everything. We're not going to. The reason Hamas attacked Israel had nothing to do with America. It had nothing to do with our power or our credibility or anything like that. It had everything to do with at least 2 decades of issues between the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip with the Israeli government. And those are issues that they've been fighting. They had already fought 4 wars before this one broke out here. They fought one with Hezbollah in Lebanon in 2006. Those are all issues that have to do with their policies and what they're doing on the ground between those 2 entities. It has nothing to do with America. So to suggest that it's America's fault that those things broke out and therefore we need to do something different is fundamentally flawed and desperately wrong on the surface of it. So now that you know his justification is wrong, let's take a look at what he suggested we do.
They are trying to drive us out of the Middle East, which has been an objective for 43 years, and that's why they're attacking us, I think now 48 times since October the 7th, 83 times before that. But even more than that, we have President Xi. You've commented on it many times. We have discussed it many times as how he has stepped up his aggression against the United States, against Taiwan, against our allies and partners for the last 2 or 3 years. We are not deterring these adversaries.
So there again, his justification is off the map. So the only reason that these Islamic groups are firing on Americans in Iraq and Syria is not just because, which is what he suggested, it's because of what happened on October 7th. It's because of the attack where Hamas slaughtered innocent Israeli civilians. And then in response, Israel has now gone in extraordinarily heavy in the Gaza Strip and are in the process of taking out the Hamas terrorists, are actually killing lots of Palestinian people, which is inflaming the entire region. And that's where the only point of vulnerability our country has to be sucked into this conflict is those troops on the ground in Iraq and in Syria. And that's why they're being attacked. It's not because just no reason. It's because of that reason. And the only way they can hit us is because we're there to be hit. If we weren't on the ground there, then they wouldn't have any chance to hit us. And then that would be frustrated. They'd have to do whatever. Well, they wouldn't be able to do anything, at least not to us, not in the region anyway. But that's the point there. The second thing where he was saying that, now he's trying to spread it out. Now it's China. Now he's trying to make you believe that China is on a military aggression, his words, not mine, And they're hitting America and they're hitting our allies. Really. China is on a military aggression against us and against our allies. What possible proof does he have? Now, there's a lot of issues between China and Taiwan, and they've been using lots of military intimidation tactics against them, that's for sure. But they have not attacked the United States. As a matter of fact, they say the opposite. They say they don't want any attacks with the United States. They don't want to go to war with the United States, and they're warning us to stay out of it because that's they view as a bilateral issue between them and Taiwan. So Kean is wrong that they're threatening us. They're only threatening us to the extent that they don't want us to get involved in a fight over there, just like Russia and Ukraine. We're partially involved there. There's a bigger risk that we could get involved here because many people actually want to fight China if they make good on their threat here. So now he's expanding the field, and again, trying to paint this picture that, man, there's bad guys everywhere. We have to get powerful and stronger. Now he's going to talk about what some of his actual suggestions are that we should do.
We are not deterring these adversaries. They see leadership in the United States. They believe it's weak. This is their perception, and they think they can take advantage of us because the United States is, generally speaking, in decline, and we don't have the same political will. And they look at our military and they see the facts, that the military post 9/11 has eroded. Its deterrent capability is not as strong as it used to be. It's still the #1 military in the world, but when you put it in certain scenarios, it is challenged.
Okay. Now here I actually partially agree with Jack Kean. Our forces are in decline. We're not as powerful as we were. Now, part of that is because it's a relative decline, meaning that many of our adversaries or potential adversaries around the world are much stronger than they were. This is not 1994 anymore, after we swept away Iraq in Desert Storm, and China was still basically a peasant army. They hadn't modernized. Russia was still actually had just disintegrated from the USSR, and that entire bloc was now incapacitated. So at that time, we were an unchallenged power in the world. Nobody, literally no one could challenge us. Now then, those have regained their feet. And even though Russia has suffered a lot in its war, they've also learned a lot, and they've developed additional capacities they didn't even have before. So they're now a growing power, even amidst their war. And of course, China is looking at all these lessons, and they're rising even faster than that. So just relatively, we're a little weaker. But there's a bigger reason why we've lost some of our power, even internally, not comparatively, but within our own power. And that's because we have spent over 2 decades fighting a bunch of wars we didn't need to fight. We have gone since 9/11, and we have sought out. It's been discussed ad nauseum, so I won't go into the details here. But of course, the 2003 invasion of Iraq was based on complete fraudulent terms, and yet we stayed there. And other than a small 3-year pause where we left for a while, we're still there today. So that's just a continual drain on our forces. That's a continual drain on our personnel. All these years we fought in Iraq on the active counterinsurgency fight, and the 2 decades we stayed in Afghanistan, which we should have gotten out early on in the process, because after 2002, we could have left Afghanistan militarily, because we had at that time destroyed the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda had been scattered to the 4 winds. So there was no military threat to even stay for. We could have turned that into a humanitarian mission and just help the Afghan people find their feet about them and build their own fortifications. We did not need to stay there. And as we proved in February or August of 2021, when the whole thing collapsed, that everything was based on a house of cards, which many had been arguing that from the beginning. But that's why we're weaker, because we spent 2 decades fighting 2 long wars we didn't need to, focused on counterinsurgency. And that means you're taking on adversaries who have no air force, have no air defense, have no missile capacity. They don't have a navy. They don't even have a formal army for the most part. So we've trained a generation of leaders, nearly every level, how to fight wars against capacities of foes that can, pull machine guns and plant bombs. That's about it. Now, if you think that that's going to prepare us for the future, and that we need to do more of that, we need to stay in Iraq and Syria on the ground there. We need to keep helping in places like maybe Libya or all in Africa, where a lot of these smaller things are going on. That's not how you make our country stronger. What you need to do is to start shedding these unnecessary missions, get our troops off the ground up there, and actually have them trained on some of these larger contingencies. Look, I'm all for a strong national defense. Don't even think that I'm, a peace stick or something, or I'm an anti-war, whatever. Definitely not. I've got 4 combat deployments. I'm very proud of having served our country, and I'm an advocate of let's make sure that we have a military that is strong, well-funded, and well-trained to defend our country against any attackers. And should China, North Korea, Iran, anyone ever threaten us, we need to make sure we've got a military that is well trained and funded and prepared for the high level attacks against a foe who does have space assets, air assets, submarines, surface vessels, intelligence, has all those things, because that is an incredibly difficult fight, much worse than anything that we've done in the last 2 decades. So if you're worried about us having a weak military, we need to shed these missions, not add more to them. But that doesn't seem to stop these generals and admirals, because here's the prescription that Kean has.
What should we do? You have seen that these measured, deliberate attacks, they were going to continue to attack us. And they're trying to kill us. And are we going to wait until somebody gets killed, and then we got to look that family in the face and try to explain why we didn't take tougher action? Come on, this is America here. Here's the issue. When Iran punches us using our proxies, we've got to go back and hurt them where they recognize that hurt. Reagan learned this in the mid-'80s. After he lost the Marine barracks, 2 embassies, Lebanon, Kuwait, hundreds killed. Later on, when Iranians were interfering with the flow of oil out of the Gulf, what did he do? He struck their oil platforms. This is Iran, struck the IRGC bases. What happened as a result of it? They shut down. President Trump, second president, learned a lesson dealing with Iran. Took a while. But in January 2020, after the Iranians are punching at us, as they're doing right now, he takes down the leader of the IRGC Quds Force, who is directing those attacks, and we kill him. They came back and hit us with a measured response and shut down, and they were back on their heels when the Biden administration take over. But what should we do about this? We have to recognize that the connection here to the Iranian proxies is the IRGC. They train those proxies at the IRGC training center in Iran. As they had, Hamas was in there in September. 500 plus of them training there.
Practicing with the paragliders, right?
Yep, practicing there with the paragliders. Take that facility down. Tell them that's what's going to happen if you continue to do this. They do it one more time. Take it down. Now, why don't they want to do that? Their concern is that's going to escalate the war, and we're going to be at a war with Iran. I don't know anybody who studies this with any analytical ability would actually think that that's what's going to happen.
Really? He doesn't know of anyone who's ever advocated that. It seems there's someone, I just can't think of who. Oh, yeah, it was this person. I just keep beating the drums on Fox News here every time I come on that we need to get those troops out of there, because being in Iraq and in Syria, all they're doing is being a point of strategic vulnerability to us. They're just sitting in the desert waiting until one of these 50 plus attacks since the 17th of October finally drives home and actually kills an American. And then, there's going to be huge pressure on the president to expand even greater his response, probably into Iran itself. I know that Senator Graham is a big proponent of that. And then you have the chance of escalating the war even higher, because Iran will definitely do something in retaliation before that. So these are not going to deter them. These strikes that we've been doing, these very small pinprick, they need to get our troops out of harm's way and put them somewhere more defensible in the region. Now, you see Kean, and I know I'm kind of picking on him because he's kind of, he makes it easy by saying a lot of these things. He's not the only one. There's a number of generals that make these same kinds of claims, and admirals. And Lindsey Graham, I mentioned there, he's a big advocate. But see, what they want to say, they're talking about what they wish would be the case. What they want to be the case is to say, yeah, we're going to roll up our sleeves and show our big guns. We're going to pop them in the nose, and that'll make them back down, and then everything will be fine. And look, some of the situations he mentioned in the past there about where Reagan had taken this action, or Trump had taken out Soleimani in Iran, Those were in a very specific situations. And by the way, the situation, especially with Trump taking out Soleimani, we were this close to getting sucked into a war then, because the measured response that Kean talked about there was actually a missile barrage that hit an American base in Iraq that we keep mentioning here. And there were, I believe the number turned out to be nearly 100 Americans that were wounded, some of them fairly seriously. A lot of them had traumatic brain injuries. Some of them probably for the rest of their lives. We were grateful and lucky that we didn't get anyone killed in that strike. And if there had been, then Trump would have come under enormous pressure to escalate another level. So because no one was killed, he was able to say, okay, we'll just let it go and we'll let that be it. And of course, Iran doesn't want a war with the United States because he is right in that. They recognize they're a weaker power. They don't have the ability to go toe to toe with the United States, so they don't want to. That is why they do a lot of this nuisance stuff that's to us with some of their proxies in the region. That part is true. But to suggest, as Kean does, that you can intentionally go in, not just take out one of their leaders who happen to be in another country, but to strike in Iran at their facilities, at the heart of their IRGC, which is the group that basically keeps the mullahs in power. Ergo, that is the key to their remaining in power. Their greatest fear is to lose power. You go and strike that, you're on crack if you think that that's going to stop Iran. I mean, have you looked anywhere at all over the last decade, 2 decades of time to see how this has worked out? We did it all over the place in Iraq, and we did it all over the place in Afghanistan. I saw it with my own eyes. We keep thinking, all right, we're going to bring more power here and hit the Taliban harder, and that's going to make them realize that they need to cooperate with the Afghan government and quit fighting. Yeah, that didn't work. Okay, well then next year let's send a little bit more. Now let's send more aircraft, more attack helicopters. Let's send more troops. Let's expand the war. We kept trying. You know what happened? Every single time it added to the Taliban numbers. It added to the attacks. It added to the number of times that the Afghan people got killed in the crossfire. So it never did what Kean is wanting it to do, is to make the bad guys back down. Now, what have we seen recently? You saw President Trump fired some shots into Syria, and some of the other actions he took in Soleimani. Did taking out Soleimani make Iran back down, or did it just make them not go more through their proxies? See, even Kean's own logic there falls apart, because what he claims is a success was actually a failure and led to more of the predictable proxy activity in the region. And now then we have President Biden's recent strikes, 3 so far, and it not only has not affected it, the number has actually increased of attacks against the U.S. Now, we already know for sure that one of those attacks was only a miracle that it didn't kill many Americans. It was a drone that crashed into a barracks in Erbil in Iraq, and the warhead did not go off. The drone crashed into the building and hurt one person, but didn't kill anyone, only because the bomb didn't go off. If it had, we would already be facing the threat to expand into Iran. And I'm telling you, the last thing America needs is to get sucked into another war in the Middle East. Sure, you can say we can ultimately prevail, and if that's all there is, if it's just isolated there, yeah, in time we could prevail, but at what cost? Look, we're already supporting Ukraine in its war with Russia. Are you going to say we should stop all that, cold turkey because we're in a war here and just leave them hanging out to dry? What about Taiwan? We keep talking about how they're at risk and all this. If we get into a war here, we can't do that. We can't fight a war there and a war here at the same time. Folks, we can't do everything just because, hey, we're America. That's what Biden said. That's what Kean said in one of those clips that we showed there. Hey, we're America. No, we can't just do everything we want to do. We have to do things that make sense, things that have a chance to succeed. And folks, that means starting at the top. We need to quit using the sledgehammer version of foreign policy where every problem we want to try to mash it. And we need to go back to statecraft. It's on, basically we're in ICU right now. We're on life support with our statecraft. We hardly even use it anymore. We need to put that back on the front burner and put more resources, put more training into it. And we need to start using it more. Because if you can get things from wisdom, if you can get things through reasonable cooperation with others and give some, take some, and prevent some of these things from exploding into war, that is 100 times better than saying, no, let's go kill them all. Let's go shoot them. Let's go fire a bunch of missiles, because it doesn't work. It doesn't succeed. And if the people, these retired generals, these retired admirals, others in Congress that keep saying, no, let's use force, and they love to go after Iran. There's just some lust for people to go after Iran. If they eventually get their way, folks, it will not, I'll categorically say it, this is for posterity, it's going to be on the video forever. It will not make us safer. It will be an anchor around our feet. It will be a drag on our economy. It will kill more Americans. It will kill more people in the region pointlessly. It will not make us safer. We're not going to eliminate Iran from the being. All we could do is get into a war. Iran is much larger than Iraq was. It has much more capacity than Iraq does. It can make a lot more trouble if we attack them. We must avoid that at all costs for our own national security. And it is time to change the narrative to just using a sledgehammer and using more statecraft for our security. That's your deep dive for today, folks. And hope you'll like and subscribe this. And again, we're going to keep covering this situation, because unfortunately it's not going anywhere. Let your friends know about this deep dive, because we're giving you information, and knowledge is power. We're giving you stuff you're just not going to get elsewhere. And we want to make sure that you keep getting it, and we'll bring it to you. We'll see you next time on Deep Dive.